Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 28th August 2025, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which have featured in today's edition of Indian Express. The Hindu edition was not available for today. Beginning with the analysis section, as Delhi government has stated that it would be providing certain key government documents with the help of WhatsApp. So in this backdrop, we'll try and understand this whole idea of e-governance, the significance, the challenges, and what all steps the government need to take further in order to realize the idea of digital India and digitally empowered citizens. Moving on to the second topic, as recently various reports have been released with respect to the education sector. So in this backdrop, we'll try and understand that what all challenges are pertaining to this particular sector and what all steps the government need to take in order to make sure that no child in India suffers from learning poverty. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues in the most simple manner possible, and we'll also be doing the value addition from prelims perspective. So stay tuned. Now, beginning with the first topic, which is dealing with e-governance in India. This particular topic you can directly correlate with GS paper 2, wherein you have topic e-governance, applications, etc. Now, why are we discussing this concept of e-governance? Because Delhi government has stated that in future it is likely going to begin with WhatsApp governance initiative. What do we mean by WhatsApp governance initiative? So the Delhi government has stated that the residents of Delhi, if they want to get marriage certificate, driving license, caste certificate, etc., they can get it from their mobile phone by using their WhatsApp number. Okay. So that is what is WhatsApp governance initiative. It has not been launched formally. It is going to be launched by the Delhi government. Now, in this respect, first thing that you need to understand is what is this whole idea of e-governance. So in simple layman terms, e-governance basically refers to use of information and communication technology for delivery of government services, for interaction between different government ministries and departments, and using information and communication technology for carrying out transaction. Okay. But when it comes to your mains answers, you are supposed to quote a formal definition. So you can make note of this definition given by World Bank, and when you will be writing it in the introduction, do mention that this definition has been given by World Bank. So according to World Bank, it basically refers to use of government agencies of information technology such as wide area network, internet, mobile computing that have the ability to transform relations with citizens, businesses and other arms of the government. What does this last line actually mean? We'll understand in a few minutes. Now, another aspect that you need to understand is when it comes to e-governance, you can correlate it with the idea of smart governance. What does S stand for? S stands for simple. So by using information and communication technology, you can get the government services sitting at your home. Okay, for example, Umang platform is there. By using that platform, you can get more than 1000 services. Okay, you don't have to go to different government websites. One platform, you can get more than 1000 plus government services. Then M stands for moral. Because when you will be using information and communication technology, it would be enhancing transparency. So ultimately, it would put a moral obligation on the government officers that they do not engage in rent-seeking activities, basically not engaging in corrupt activities. Then A stands for accountability, R stands for responsiveness, and T stands for transparency. Okay, so that is how you can equate e-governance with smart governance. Now, I told you that we'll try and understand what does this line imply, that it is going to transform the relationship between the government and citizens, government and business, government and other government departments. Because when it comes to e-governance, we have different types of interaction. For example, we have government to citizen interaction. Okay, so the government is using information and communication technology to provide you various services. For example, we discussed this Umang app. Then we have Passport Seva, which allows the citizen to apply for and track passports online. Then we have government to business, which is basically regulating the interaction between the government and the business. For example, we have government e-marketplace, we have food licensing and registration system, which enables online business licensing. Then we have government to government interaction. So this e-governance is helping us to address one of the major bottlenecks when it comes to policy implementation, that is lack of interministerial and interdepartmental coordination. Okay, because we have one major type of interaction, that is government to government interaction. Prominent example is, let's suppose, Khanaje system in Karnataka, which manages the government financial operations online. And we also have the Gati Shakti portal, okay, which is improving the coordination among different ministries when it comes to infrastructural planning. Then we have government to employees, okay, how it is managing its relation with the human resource. For example, we have human resource management system of Indian Railways. We also have I Got Karamyogi platform. Through this, the government is doing the capacity building of civil servants. So having understood different kinds of interactions which are there when it comes to e-governance, I think now you can easily decode the significance of e-governance in India. First significance, how it is improving the interdepartmental and interministerial coordination. Example, PM Gati Shakti portal. Previously, what used to happen? The road ministry has built the road. Then the urban affairs ministry would come. The sanitation ministry would come, that we have to, put in place the sanitation pipelines, etc. So again, the road would be digged up. So that used to cause huge cost to the public exchequer. So that is why we came up with this PM Gati Shakti portal, which is going to improve the coordination among the different departments and ministries. Herein, we are ensuring coordination among 15 government ministries. Then it is improving efficiency also, because by sitting at the home only, I can get various government services. We have DigiLocker. If you have kept your documents there, even if your phone is lost, even if your tablet or any electronic device you have, you just need to log in your email ID and you will get access to all your digital documents. And if you have all the documents on digital locker, now it is very, very easy for you to fill the different forms of government examinations, as well as avail the schemes also, scheme benefits also. Then we have e-courts portal also, which is enabling the courts to do the real-time monitoring of the cases which are pending, and it also helps the court to prioritize certain important cases as well. So that's how it is promoting efficiency also. Then it is promoting transparency and accountability. One major example that you need to make note of is CP grams. What is the CP grams? Centralized Public Grievance Redress and Monitoring System. Okay, so if you have any concern with regard to a central government department or ministry, you can raise your grievance on this particular portal. Okay, so this is how e-governance is helping us in ensuring accountable governance. Then we have Pragati. This is building a culture of proactive governance and timely implementation. What does this actually mean? So under this Pragati, what PMO is going to do? So PM would be having a meeting with the chief secretaries and the central government, secretaries which are there on a monthly basis. And these secretaries would be putting in front of the PM the grievances of the common man. And from where they will be picking up the grievances of the common man? CP grams. Okay, so that is how it is putting in place a culture of proactive governance, where we are hearing the grievances of the common man also. Then we have Darpan dashboard. Okay, what we are doing under this Darpan dashboard, it would be displaying the key performance indicators of different state related schemes on a real-time basis. So this would be, accessible to senior government functionaries of state government, and accordingly they can take the relevant decisions also. Then how it is promoting participatory governance. So we have My Government platform, wherein before the budget and everything, the government is asking for feedback from citizens. Okay, so that is how it is giving way to participatory governance also. Then it is improving accessibility of services also. From your home, you can get the facilities of a doctor by using e-Sanjeevani. Then we can use Mobile Seva, which is providing 1,000+ services by mobile phone only. Then this e-governance is also improving the government to business relationship. Okay, getting environmental clearances is also becoming easy because of the Parivesh portal. Okay, so once you have this idea of the interactions, different type of interactions that we have in e-governance, you can easily decode the significance when it comes to e-governance. Now, having understood the significance of e-governance, let's just understand the challenges which are there. First, and the prominent challenge is digital divide. So if you go by the inequality report of Oxfam of 2022, what we found out that it is more likely that the wealthier individuals in India would be using the digital payment mode of transaction as compared to the poorest sections of the Indian society. And if you talk in terms of gender, this report further points out that only 1/3 of the internet users are women. So there is huge digital divide when it comes to the poorer as well as the wealthier section, when it comes to the gender basis also. Okay, so this is going to have an exclusionary effect when it comes to accessing the e-governance services. Then there are privacy related concerns also. Recently it was alleged by an American cybersecurity firm that more than 800 million Indians' Aadhaar data is freely available on dark web. Now, dark web is that area which you cannot actually go to by searching something on your common search engines like your Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, etc. Okay, so this is problematic. And recently there was report which points out that how the vaccination related details with respect to COVID-19 pandemic which was there on this CoWIN platform has been leaked. Okay, so this raises these privacy concerns among the individuals. So they would be reluctant to make use of this e-governance platforms which are there. Then what we have seen that cyber crimes are also on a rise. Okay, 2022, 1.3 million cyber crimes were witnessed. Okay, cyber frauds were witnessed. Then ransom attack was there on AIMS. So all this basically undermines the trust of the citizens when it comes to e-governance initiatives. Then there are infrastructure related constraints also, especially when it comes to the rural area. Okay, and this severely impacts the internet speed also when it comes to rural areas. Then there are barriers when it comes to accessing the e-governance initiatives. Why? One barrier is the language barrier, because more than 80% of the content is available in English language, which is not comprehensible by various sections of the Indian society. So that excludes those particular sections of the Indian society who cannot actually understand English. Then it is not being designed in an inclusive manner. Okay, if you talk about e-KYC, recently you must have, if you are following the newspaper, you must have seen this, that a case went to the Supreme Court wherein it was pointed out that how this e-KYC is excluding the acid attack victims, the people who are blind, etc. Okay, so this accessibility aspect is also lacking when it comes to e-governance initiatives. Then there is resistance to change among the government officers itself. Okay, they still want to continue with the paper based, mode of working, because that helps them to engage in rent seeking activities, and if they want to move in this direction of e-governance, then they also have to enhance their digital skill set that they are not willing to do. Then there are cost constraints also. See, when it comes to the digital technology, you need to understand that there are rapid advancements that are happening when it comes to the digital technology. And every time if an advancement is happening, how the government departments can keep on spending more and more money to install new systems. Okay, so it has cost related aspects as well. Now, what all initiatives the government has taken when it comes to e-governance? Some of the initiatives we have already discussed. We have Digital India Mission, which has recently completed 10 years. Herein the focus was improving the digital infrastructure, especially in the rural areas, reducing the cost of internet. Because of this Digital India Mission, what we are seeing that currently you can get 1 GB data at ₹10 only. Okay. Then the government has set up common service centers, especially in the rural areas, because people do not understand that how to get these e-governance, services. So what we have seen when it comes to common service centers, we have witnessed 5-time increase in this common service centers over a period of time. Then we have the National E-Governance Plan 2.0, which was again an integral aspect of Digital India Mission. So herein we started using different kind of technology, which is their cloud computing, geospatial data set, etc. Then we use Jam Trinity. This framework helped us to enhance the financial inclusion. More than 50 crore bank accounts were opened when it comes to Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, and this framework was used for DBT also, direct benefit transfer also, which helped the government to reduce a lot of leakages also. Then to improve the digital infrastructure when it comes to the rural areas, we have BharatNet program. Then enhancing the relation between the government and the business, we have government e-marketplace, okay, wherein it is being prioritized that the product should be procured from MSMEs, giving a boost to MSME sector. And when it comes to this government e-marketplace, we are also trying to enhance the transparency, okay, when it comes to whatever transaction is happening between the government and the business houses. Now, having understood the challenges, what more steps we need to take in order to make sure that every Indian citizen is digitally empowered? So first and foremost, we need to get the trust of the citizens when it comes to the cybersecurity framework. For this, we need to make sure that we put in place a robust cybersecurity framework. For example, we can make use of end-to-end encryption technique, we can make use of quantum key distribution, okay, wherein it would be very difficult for the third party to decode whatever communication is happening between A and B. So we need to make use of such advanced technology. Then how the government has come up with E0 FIR initiative when it comes to the cyber crimes which are there. You need to let me know that what is the threshold limit when it comes to E0 FIR initiative, and which is the ministry which has launched this particular initiative. Okay, so more such initiative needs to be released, launched by the government, so that we can enhance the citizens' trust when it comes to the cybersecurity framework. Then we need to enhance the interoperability. Now, what is happening right now? Different government departments, they are managing their different set of portals, and there is lack of coordination between the different government departments. So this severely impacts the use value of the data. So if we want to enhance the use value of the data, different departments should coordinate with each other. So whatever data we are collecting under one scheme, that should be used by the other, ministry or department. Okay. For example, if we are collecting the data under Swamitwa scheme, that data should be used by the finance ministry also, okay, to look into the taxation assessments. Then we need to make website user friendly, basically making sure that the information is provided in different vernacular languages. We have made great advancement in this regard. We have Bhashni AI tool, which is providing the information in more than 30 plus languages, but more advancement needs to be done in this particular regard, because we have huge linguistic diversity. You need to understand that. And we also need to make sure that the e-governance platforms are accessible to the Divyang sections as well. They should not be excluded from the benefits of e-governance. Then we need to enhance the digital infrastructure when it comes to rural areas. For that, what we need to make sure that we are effectively implementing the BharatNet program. Okay, and we also need to improve the digital literacy when it comes to urban areas and among the women also. For that, we need to ensure effective implementation of PM Disha scheme. Then we need to do the capacity building of the government officers, so that the reluctance to change that we are seeing among the government officers, we could address that. For that, what we need to do? Effective implementation of Mission Karam Yogi. Then we should exploit the PPP mode. Okay, this would enable the government to get advanced technology as well as expertise from the private sector as well as the resources. And lastly, if we want to ensure that the citizens continue to invest when it comes to the e-governance ecosystem that is there, and they continue to have trust on this particular ecosystem, we need to put in place continuous monitoring and evaluation, so that we can take proactive action whenever any issue is appearing. Okay, real-time action could be taken. All this would enable us to realize the idea of digital India and digitally empowered citizens. Now, this is a PYQ which has been asked by UPSC, and previously, if you will see, one or the other year, you will be getting a very simple question from this e-governance. So do prepare this particular topic effectively. And I have also framed a practice question for you people. So based on the discussion that we have, try and attempt this particular question. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has come up with various statistics which point out that half of the urban Indian students which are studying in 11th and 12th grade, they are taking private coaching classes. Now, this particular topic you can relate with GS paper 2, issues related to education. Now, before we understand that what all challenges are there when it comes to the education sector, let's just understand what all improvements we have made when it comes to this particular sector in the recent time. First and foremost, we have emphasized upon the digital learning infrastructure. So in order to give a boost to online learning, we have come up with PM eVidya, we have Swayam Prabha, etc. Under PM eVidya, we would be basically unifying all the online learning material which is there at one place. Then we are focusing upon student-centered learning. So we are trying to shift from the rote learning method that we used to adopt to experiential learning or play-based method of learning. Okay, play-based method of learning is something that we have institutionalized when it comes to early childhood care and education under these particular initiatives. Navchetna, which is there for children who are in the age bracket of 0 to 3 years, and Adharshila, which is basically for the students who fall in the age bracket of 3 to 6 years. You need to let me know in the comment section that which ministry has launched this two initiatives, okay, because this was there in yesterday's newspaper itself. Okay, I've given you the hint. Then under the national education policy, we have went away from the traditional mechanism that a student need to focus upon one particular subject, get the specialization maybe in science, maybe in arts, commerce, etc. Now we are going with a multidisciplinary approach. Okay, so whatever subjects you want to read, you can pick and choose. Because nowadays, whatever challenges we are witnessing, they are multidimensional in nature. So for that, we need multidisciplinary approach also. Then we understand this thing that learning outcomes are better when a child is taught in his or her mother tongue, and that is what is being focused when it comes to the national education policy. And we are also focusing upon vocational training, okay, when it comes to this NEP 2020 from class 6th grade. Then we are also focusing upon teacher training under this Nishtha program. And under this NEP 2020, we have mandated a 4-year integrated Bachelor of Education, okay, wherein we will be combining the subject knowledge with the pedagogical training. So herein we are trying to focus that the teacher should understand that how to invoke critical thinking when it comes to the students, how we can introduce various co-curricular activities that child do not go with the rote learning approach. Okay, we need to make sure that a child has innovative approach whenever he or she is reading a particular topic. Then we are focusing upon improving the foundational literacy and the numeracy skills so that we do not see learning poverty when it comes to children. They should be able to do basic maths, they should be able to read basic English text. Then we are also improving the infrastructure. For example, under Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, under PM Shri schools, the government is investing in the laboratories when it comes to schools. It is putting in place advanced online, digital ecosystem, okay, making a change when it comes to pedagogy also, provoking critical thinking, innovative culture when it comes to the schools. And lastly, we are also giving a boost to the innovation culture. We have created the Anusandhan National Research Foundation to give a boost to the R&D, and we have the Atal Innovation Mission. Under this, we have Atal Tinkering Labs, which is giving a boost to critical thinking, entrepreneurial skills, problem solving ability among the students. And that is the reason last analyst we discussed that how because of this Atal Tinkering Labs, we are witnessing an increase in the number of patents being filed by the educational institutions, for example, IIT Bombay. Now, having understood the positive side of this particular sector, let's just understand what all challenges are impacting this particular sector. So first and foremost, inadequate funding. The government should spend roughly 6% of the GDP on education sector, but it is spending less than 3% if you go by the recent budget. Then there is inadequate teacher training. Even though we are providing the training to the student, we have provided new learning materials also to the student under the Nishtha program. But few months back there was an editorial in The Hindu which points out that the teachers actually don't know that how to use that learning material. Okay, so how they would be able to bring the real change when it comes to pedagogy at the grassroots level, that is the challenge. Then there are huge vacancies when it comes to teachers also. This was pointed out by Niti Aayog in one of its report in 2023 that over 1 million teacher vacancies are there, especially we are seeing more number of vacancies in the rural areas. At times there is only one teacher in a rural school. So you can understand what would be the pupil teacher ratio. If there are less number of teachers, obviously the teacher cannot focus on a particular individual and it cannot, change the pedagogy according to the learning requirements of a single student. So that is problematic. This is going to have a negative implication on the learning outcomes. Then we have poor infrastructure. If you go by the 13th annual status of education report, 23% of the rural school have unusable toilets and roughly 11 to 12% has no separate toilets for girls. So what happens because of this? Girl drop out. And ultimately, when a girl is not getting education, she would be married earlier. This adds to another social evil, that is increasing child marriages. Then we are seeing high dropout rates, especially at the secondary education phase. According to the government data itself, we are seeing 20% dropout after the 10th class, okay, in 2021-22. Why? Because there is lack of quality teachers. As we discuss in rural areas, one teacher is only teaching the 3-4 classes, okay. So there is problem with the teacher, there is problem with the infrastructure, as and when the girl is aging, the parents do not want to send the child because there is lack of infrastructure also. So all these things boil up to higher dropout rates. And in this case, we are seeing that the worst performers are Odisha and Bihar. Then even today what we are seeing is rote learning is being emphasized. The teachers are not able to effectively make a remarkable change when it comes to their pedagogy. Again, according to the SR report of 2023, what we have seen that 30% of class 8 students cannot solve the basic maths, despite our focus upon the foundational literacy. Then increasing privatization. So if you go by the recent 80th round of national sample survey, what we have found out that nearly 1/3 of all the students were taking or had taken private coaching. And what we are seeing another trend, that when it comes to the expenditure done by the households when it comes to education, that is quite high if a child is studying in the private school. If a child is studying in government school, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 rupees you have to spend, okay, in a particular academic year. But if your child is studying in a private educational institution, then you have to spend more than 25,000 in a particular year. So that adds to cost of living also. And increasing privatization also is a signal that there are issues with the quality of education being provided in the government institution. Why I am saying this? Because you can see urban-rural divide. Majority of the students are studying in the government school only in the rural areas. 2/3 of them are studying in the government school. The ratio is quite less, nearly 30% are getting the education in the government school when you talk about the urban areas. Then outdated curriculum. This is another problem because there is lack of industry-academia linkages. And what is happening because of this? That the graduates which are coming out of the higher educational institution, more than 50% of them do not have the adequate skill set which is needed for Industry 4.0. And that is the reason recently what we witnessed, that 22 out of 23 IITs except IIT Bombay, placement went down, okay, in 2023-24 as compared to the placement level that we saw right after the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is another concern. Then there is issue of digital divide also, especially among the rural and the urban areas. At one go we are pushing online learning, but we also need to take care of the infrastructural bottlenecks which are there when it comes to the rural areas, as has been pointed out by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Now, having understood the challenges that we are seeing when it comes to this particular sector, what is going to be the ultimate impact of this? First and foremost, you will witness an increase in the learning poverty. What is this learning poverty? So if you go by the definition of World Bank, learning poverty basically refers to a child who has attained the age of 10 years, but then also that child is unable to read and understand a simple text. And what we have seen based on the annual status of education report 2024, that 50% of class 5th grade student can't read even class 2nd texts. So there is some severe concern with respect to the quality of education being provided, especially in the government schools. Then it is going to have a negative economic impact also. Why? If you go by UNESCO, in one of its reports, it's point out that if you can reduce the people who are leaving the school early just by 10%, this would give a boost to your GDP by 1 or 2%. So if more number of people are dropping out from the school, that means it is going to have negative implication from the GDP also, because you will not have your demographic dividend. Then your demographic dividend would be turning into demographic disaster, because your youth does not have the adequate skill set, so unemployment levels would shoot up. And that is what we are witnessing. Structural unemployment. I've already told you with respect to the IITs, which are one of the prestigious higher educational institution. In that also, what is happening? Because of lack of industrial academia linkages, we are witnessing that the IIT graduates are also not able to get their dream jobs. Okay, so the placement levels are going down. What do we mean by structural unemployment, by the way? Structural unemployment basically means the skill set which I am possessing, that is not being demanded by the industry. Okay, so when there is a skill mismatch between what you are ready to offer and what the industry is demanding, that basically situation is referred to be as structural unemployment, and that is what we are seeing with respect to the IITs also. Then we are seeing social exclusion, especially when it comes to girls, the STs and the ST community. High dropouts among them. Ultimately, when you don't get the education, your educational qualification would be quite low. Ultimately, you will be a part of the dependent population rather than being a part of the working age population. And if you are not financially independent, ultimately, you will not be able to give a good life to your children, and that would give a rise to intergenerational inequality. Okay, so that is problematic. Then at the global level also, if the quality of education is not good, your performance would be very bad. When it comes to the educational institution, they would not be coming within the top 100 ranks, okay, when it comes to the global ranking. And when your quality of education is not good, ultimately this is going to severely impact the innovation culture in your country. And if you lack innovation culture, we have studied in the previous analyst with respect to patents that innovation culture is needed. Only then you will be able to give a boost to the manufacturing sector also. The more innovation you will be doing, the more your say would be increasing when it comes to the international affairs. And that is the case with China. Okay, so that is something we are losing upon. Having understood the impacts, what needs to be done now? So first and foremost, the government need to increase the expenditure being done on this particular sector. It should be 6% of the GDP. So that we can make sure that infrastructure is up to the mark. Then we need to enhance the quality of the curriculum also. We need to revise the curriculum, keeping in mind that what the industry is being demanding. And at the school level, the different schools can adopt the Delhi happiness curriculum, okay, wherein we are coming up with experiential learning and we are not going with the rote learning mechanism. Then we need to ensure digital equity. How? Effective implementation of the BharatNet program as well as PM Disha program, enhancing digital literacy as well. Then adequate infrastructure is needed so that the woman, girl child are not dropping out from the schools and we don't see vicious cycle of poverty as well as intergenerational inequality when it comes to this particular sections of the Indian society. Lastly, the government needs to come up with targeted policies for women, for ST, for SC. See, different sections have different problem. If you talk about girl child, the major problem is lack of toilets. Okay, so that needs to be addressed. Parents are not ready to spend on the education of the girl child. So the government should come up with the scholarship schemes for girl child. When you talk about ST students, their problem is different. Their problem is the linguistic barriers. They do not understand the thing being told in the English language. So what needs to be done? We need to make sure that such teachers are deployed in the tribal belt, wherein the teachers are well acquainted with the local language. Okay, so you need to understand that you can't go with one size fits all approach. Different sections have different problem. So the policy should also be curated keeping in mind the challenges or the problems being faced by the different sections of the Indian society. That's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic, and in the end you can talk about that how all these steps would make sure that not a single child suffers from learning poverty. So UPSC has asked a question on this particular sector, and I have also framed a practice question for you people. So do practice this question and let us know your answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now let's begin with the simplified section. Another wave of economic nationalism that we can see in US. Why I'm saying this? Because recently US Secretary of Commerce has called H1B Visa program as a scam. This particular topic you can associate with the economy section. Why has he called this visa program as a scam? Because according to him, it is taking away the employment opportunity when it comes to Americans, and this program has greatly benefited the Indians. This has been validated by the US Citizenship and Immigration Services data. Now let's just note down certain prelim pointers with regard to this particular program. So this program was started in 1990s under the US Immigration Act of 1990. And what was the aim? Basically, if an American company is unable to find a qualified American, then it can fill the skill gap by hiring the skilled professional from overseas. But this skilled professional would be getting the employment for a temporary period only. Okay. Now, is that so that anybody can apply for this visa? The answer is no. You need to have higher skill set and you need to have at least a bachelor degree. And the company which is giving me this visa, that needs to make sure that there is lack of qualified US applicant for that particular post, for which I am getting the H1B visa. Now, how the people are selected when it comes to this particular visa program? By luck by chance, via lottery system. And what is the validity? If I once get this particular visa, so it would be applicable for 3 years. I can extend it once for another set of 3 years. So in general, it is valid for a maximum period of 6 years. Now again, if I want to apply for this particular visa, I need to leave US for at least 12 months before reapplying. Or I can apply for permanent residence. So the people who have this visa, they can apply for green card when it comes to US, getting the permanent residency for themselves as well as their families also. Now, will I continue to work on that same H1B visa if I'm changing my job? The answer is no. If I'm changing my job, then I need to apply again for a new visa. Now, when it comes to US, it has put a cap. How many new H1B visa would be issued in a particular year? So, in a particular year, it is 65,000. Additional 20,000 visas could be availed for the people who are getting higher education or a higher degree from US university. You see, they do not want the people who have got education from US university to again go back to their origin country. Okay, they want to capitalize upon that skill set. Now, there are exceptions to this when it comes to this annual cap. So, the people who are holding this particular visa, if they want to seek their continued employment or if they want to seek employment in higher educational institution, NGOs, etc., then they would be provided with exemptions. Now, why the US Commerce Secretary has said that this visa program is a fraud? Because as you can see from this data point, that it has majorly benefited the Indians. So, first major benefiter is the Indians. Secondly, it is China, who has got 12 to 30% of the visa when it comes to 2023. And this visa, whosoever is getting this visa, they are people with high skill set, so they are getting better salaries also. And this is why the Commerce Secretary has raised the concern, because better employment opportunity are being taken up by the Indians. But the Indian government has stated that the American companies would be at loss if the US government stopped this H1B visa program. Because there was a lack of skill set, that is why you started providing H1B visa to Indians and let's suppose to Chinese professionals. And based on this particular program only, different tech giants, you can see Microsoft, Oracle, Google, Amazon, they have been able to increase their stronghold when it comes to US economy. It is only because they were able to meet that skill gap from Indians. Okay. Let's see what the Trump administration take a call when it comes to this H1B visa program, whether it would be ending it or not. That is something that you need to follow. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, as the Trump administration has increased the tariff when it comes to US goods, so in this backdrop, the government is doing consultation with the e-commerce sector. This particular topic, again, you can connect with the economy section. So what is the agenda of consultation? That how we can give a boost to the exports from this e-commerce sector and how we can make effective use of e-commerce export hub model, which was introduced in this year budget, and how the government can provide aid to MSME sector, because if you look at the e-commerce sector, it is dominated by the small players. Now, what is this e-commerce export hub all about? As the name itself suggests, creating a hub wherein the e-commerce sector can get all the services at one place: custom clearance, quality certification, packaging, off-port warehousing, etc. So this would reduce the time that the sector needs to get different services, and it would also reduce the cost. So it would go a long way in enhancing the price competitiveness of the exports being done by this particular sector. So under this particular model, we have started 5 pilot projects. You also need to make note of other measures which the government has taken to basically provide support to MSMEs when it comes to e-commerce sector. We have Trade Connect e-platform, wherein the government is providing the export related information to the small players so that they can effectively plan that what all products needs to be exported and what should be the timing, etc. Then the government is providing export duty remission under the RoDTEP scheme, and we have Dak Ghar Niryat Kendra, which is being implemented by Department of Post, wherein the assistance is being provided to the small exporters in this e-commerce sector with respect to documentation, packaging, regulatory compliances, etc. Now, one of the major bone of contention which is there between the MSME sector and the retailers is whether we should allow 100% FDI when it comes to the inventory based model of e-commerce. For this, we need to first understand that what are the different models in which this e-commerce companies operate. First is business to business e-commerce. Let's suppose I am a business enterprise, I am selling the product to you, you are the one who is finally selling it to the customers. Okay. Then inventory based model. Herein the e-commerce platform would be owning the inventory of goods and services. And this entity is the one which is creating the e-commerce platform also. So I am managing the inventory and I am the one who is managing the platform also, and I am directly selling it to the customers. Example could be your Reliance India. Then we have market based model. The way we interact with the sellers in the physical market, the same thing happens in this market based model also. So e-commerce platform is just a platform where the buyers and the sellers can meet. Okay. This e-commerce website do not own any goods and services. Okay. It is the different sellers who are selling their product on this particular platform. Example could be Amazon, Flipkart, etc. So why we have not allowed FDI when it comes to the inventory based model? Because it would go against the interest of retailers. Because if this e-commerce sector is owning the inventory, don't you think so it would be providing the product at a very cutthroat price? This practice you can refer to be as predatory pricing, and this would go against the interest of retailers also. Okay. So this is the different model under which the e-commerce websites function. So at present, as I told you, 100% FDI is allowed when it comes to the market based model. Okay, because it is just like how the fiscal market operates. Here the e-commerce entity does not own the inventory of goods. But FDI is not allowed when it comes to inventory based model. When you talk about this particular sector, it is, as I told you, primarily dominated by the small businesses, and it is the small businesses which are exporting products valued between $25 to $1,000, and they are exporting these popular items like handicraft, ready-made garments, gems, jewelries, etc. Now, what is the export potential of this particular sector? So according to experts, this particular sector has the potential to export, and the value would be around $350 billion by 2030. What are the growth drivers? Why the experts are saying that this sector has huge export potential? As well as this sector also have potential to grow domestically also. Given the increasing internet penetration, more than 80% of the Indian population have access to internet. Then the government has given a boost to digital infrastructure. We right now studied about the e-governance initiatives. Then the middle class population is rising, disposable income are rising. That is another, thing which is giving a boost to growth to this particular sector. And then it is convenient also. Nowadays, I don't want to travel to the fiscal market to get anything. I'll be sitting on my sofa and I'll be ordering something. Okay, so these are the reason why this particular sector is increasing, and this you can also apply when it comes to the other countries also. In other countries also, internet penetration is quite high, and if the e-commerce sector is able to provide the products at a competitive price, because the government has come up with the export hub model also, so this would be enhancing their price competitiveness and ultimately adding to the exports. But currently, what is the issue? That the exports of this particular sector is quite less. It is about $5 billion only. But if you compare it with China, it is quite less. China, $300 billion. And why is it so? Because of the regulatory compliance, okay, which is quite high, especially when it comes to the small firms. Now, what needs to be done to improve the situation? So, the article points out that we need to come up with a separate e-commerce export policy like what we have in other countries like China, Korea, etc. We need to improve the overall regulatory framework. We need to enhance the consumer satisfaction. We need to safeguard the consumer rights. Okay, so these e-commerce websites should do accurate product description, transparent pricing should be there. It should not practice predatory pricing, fair return policies, exchange policies should be there, etc. Then we need to put in place a secure payment system. Only then the citizens would be incentivized to order from these e-commerce websites. So for that, we need to make sure that all the e-commerce websites comply with the payment card industry data security standards, which secure your credit card data. Okay. Lastly, to further give a boost to the exports when it comes to this particular sector, the government can provide subsidies to this particular sector whenever they are procuring some sort of raw material, etc. And the government can also provide some sort of interest subvention, okay, when it comes to the loans being taken by the MSME when it comes to this e-commerce sector. Now, UPSC has asked a question with respect to the different types of models that we studied right now when it comes to e-commerce. So based on that knowledge, try and practice this question and let us know your answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently, the cabinet has approved certain changes when it comes to PM Swanidhi scheme. This particular topic you can associate with the polity section. So, major change has been that this scheme would now be extended till 2030, and we have also made changes when it comes to the loan amount which the street vendors could get. The scheme was launched in the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, and this was in line with the Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign as well. Now, let's note down certain prelim pointers with regard to this particular scheme. So, whatever element I have written, this is what we used to witness previously. So, this was launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and this is the one which is the implementing agency right now also. So, what was the purpose? To provide affordable working capital loans to the street vendors who were severely impacted by COVID-19 lockdown especially. Okay, and who would be the implementing agency? So, it would be your SIDBI. Then in the first tranche, earlier the street vendors could get a working capital loan up till 10,000. Now, changes have been made with respect to this first tranche, and they have to repay this within a tenure of 1 year. This is same even today. Okay, we have made changes when it comes to the loan amount which could be given to the street vendors. Okay, one more thing, you need to let me know in the comment section that what is the difference between fixed capital and working capital, because UPSC has asked a question on this thing. Okay, moving on, what benefits were provided if they made timely repayment of the loans? So, they can get an interest subsidy at 7% per annum, and this would be transferred through the DBT mode. Then if they use digital transaction, then cashback incentives were also there. They used to get rupees 100 per month. The loan amount can be used for any purpose related to street vending, getting raw materials, paying rent, purchasing equipment, etc. Now, what was the eligibility criteria? It is applicable even right now. So, the street vendor needs to possess certificate of vending or identity card which was issued by the local bodies, urban local bodies, or if the street vendor do not have this certificate of vending or identity card, then that vendor needs to be identified in the survey of street vendors done by the local authorities. Now, what happens if a vendor do not have the certificate of vending also, and he was also not enumerated when it comes to the survey being done by the local authorities? So, in that case, that vendor would be issued a letter of recommendation by the urban local bodies or the town vending committee. Okay. Now, what all changes have been introduced in the recent decision taken by the cabinet? So, we have extended the period for which the scheme would be operational. So from December 31st, 2024, it would be applicable till 31st March 2030. And according to the government, it is going to benefit more than 1.15 crore beneficiaries. Then we have made changes with respect to the working capital loans which would be provided under the scheme. And the changes you can see in the first and the second tranche. So in the first tranche, earlier the amount was 10,000, it has been increased to 15,000. Second tranche, earlier the amount was 20,000, it has been increased to 25,000. Third tranche, it remains the same, 50,000. Now, there are provision of UPI linked RuPay card, credit card, if they have repaid the second loan also. And digital cashback incentives are also there up to 1,600 if they are using digital transaction mode. And the coverage have also been expanded. Earlier, it was applicable to statutory towns also. Now, in a phase manner, we would be expanding the application of this particular scheme to census towns, peri-urban areas. What are statutory towns, peri-urban areas, etc. So, when you talk about statutory towns, these are the towns which are officially designated, okay, by the relevant state government, and you need to understand if it is a statutory town, it would be having a local body to administer it, okay, municipality, corporation, cantonment board, etc. Now, what are census towns? Which basically satisfy these three criteria. Minimum population of 5,000, at least 75% of male working population should be engaged in non-agriculture pursuits, and population density of at least 400% per square kilometer. But you need to make note of that when it comes to census town, they don't have a local body, okay, like municipality, etc. And what are peri-urban areas? As the name itself suggests, these are the areas which are close to urban areas. Okay, since they are close to urban areas, they are seeing migration from the urban areas, in migration of population from the urban areas, because there is high density when it comes to the urban areas. That's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs had made a request to the Registrar General of India that we should separately count the PVTGs in the upcoming census exercise. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2 vulnerable sections. Now, why the Ministry of Tribal Affairs have asked the Registrar General of India to separately count the PVTGs household as well as individuals? So that we can get adequate data with respect to PVTGs and the government can come up with the targeted policies for this particular vulnerable section. And if this happens, this would be the first time that we would be taking into account or enumerating the PVTGs separately as a separate category. Now, you need to make note of certain prelim pointers with respect to the PVTGs because UPSC has asked a question on this thing. Now, when it comes to particularly vulnerable tribal groups, they were previously known as primitive tribal groups. So, it is basically a sub-classification of ST only, but they are considered to be more vulnerable among the ST community. Then, this categorization was initiated by the Debar Commission, and based on the recommendation of Debar Commission, the government created the primitive tribal groups in 1975. Later on in 2006, we changed this name primitive because there was problem with this word primitive. Okay, so later on they were categorized as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So at present we have 75 PVTGs out of the 705 scheduled tribes that we have, and they are spread over 18 states and one UT, that UT is Andaman and Nicobar. Odisha has the highest number of PVTGs. And what is the criteria that is being followed for identification of PVTGs? Their population should be either stagnant or declining. They should be using pre-agriculture technology, literacy level should be very low, and there should be economic backwardness. Now, why there is a need for separate enumeration in the census? So, we have issues with the census of 2011. Therein 40 PVTGs were counted as single entry under the broad categorization of ST category. So, you need to know that if the government would not be having adequate data, how it can come up with a targeted policy for enhancing the welfare of the PVTGs. Okay, so the government lacked the specific data on key demographic indicators. And right now, we don't have the complete population data with regard to all the PVTGs, okay, based on state-wise. We don't have that particular demographic data. So, that is problematic, and this affects the effective implementation of targeted welfare scheme. So we need sociological mapping. Only then we will be able to understand the different demographical trend also with respect to migration, urbanization, employment, fertility among these PVTGs. And this data is needed. See, you need data, only then we can move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. And to uplift this particular section, we have the PM Janman scheme, which was launched in 2023 at Khuti, Jharkhand on the occasion of Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. And this is targeting all the PVTGs communities that are there. And what is the aim? To provide basic facilities to the PVTGs household and individuals, like safe housing, clean drinking water, improve access to education, health, sanitation, etc. Now, the article further points out that it's okay that Tribal Affairs Ministry has made a request that we should count the PVTGs separately. But before we carry out the census, we also need to think of changing the definition or the criteria that we use to categorize a ST community as a PVTGs. Because one of the criteria we discussed was that they should be using pre-agriculture technology. Now, you need to understand, because of the intervention of the state, now the PVTGs community also know how to make use of, develop technologies, like they know how to access internet, how to, go to social media and use it. So in this backdrop, we need to think of redefining the definition before we go ahead with the census exercise. Now that's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. We have a PYQ on this particular topic. Based on the discussion that we have, you will be easily able to solve this PYQ. Do let me know the answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, the last topic for today's analyst. Recently, a unique discovery of quadruple star system has been done by the scientists. So this you can associate with the space section. This quadruple star system has been discovered in the Milky Way, and it has been named as UPM Abab. Okay, just make note of this name. You can get a prelim question directly that what does this actually associate with. So what we have found a pair of cold brown dwarfs orbiting a pair of young red dwarf stars. And the study was published in the journal Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. And we had the contribution of scientists from different countries like UK, Brazil, South Astrophysical Research Center, Chile, Spain, etc. Now, this finding could improve our understanding with respect to brown dwarf, okay, which are difficult to detect. Now, why they are difficult to detect and what are these brown dwarfs? So, they have similarities with stars also, and they have some characteristics similar to planets also. Let's just understand what all similarities are there. When it comes to stars, how they are similar to stars? Because they are formed by collapsing clouds of gas and dust. That is how stars are also formed. But they are known as failed stars. Why? Because they don't have enough mass to consistently fuse hydrogen. Okay, that is why they don't shine, they don't emit light, and that is the reason it is difficult for the scientists to detect them. Then what all characteristics they share with the planets? So their atmosphere is similar to that of gas giant planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and their atmosphere consists of clouds, molecules like H2O, etc. And these brown dwarfs can also be 70 times more massive than the Jupiter. So they have characteristics similar to stars also and characteristics similar to planet also. But why it is difficult to detect them? As we discussed, they don't shine. Okay, they are cold and faint. So how the scientists can detect them? Because they typically orbit a companion star. So this companion star, as it is brighter, so we are able to detect this brown dwarf also, because it would be orbiting that companion star. It is usually a part of a multiple system with a brighter star, and the chances are they were formed out of the same material at the same place and the same time. Since it orbits a shining star, this is not shining. I am talking about the brown dwarfs. Okay, but since the scientists can detect this, so they also get to know about this brown dwarfs. And once they study the characteristics of the shining star, they can easily get to know some of the characteristics with respect to brown dwarfs also. Measuring the brighter star, that is how the scientists get to know about the brown dwarfs also. Okay, this helps them to know about their age, temperature, composition of the brown dwarfs also. Now, what is the significance of the recent discovery? So we have got 2 brown dwarfs which are orbiting 2 red dwarf stars. Okay, both are of the size of Jupiter and they emit no visible light. That is the reason it is difficult to detect them. So red dwarfs, they are much brighter, and that is the reason the scientists were able to detect these 2 brown dwarfs as well. For the first time, this quadruple system has been found. Smaller stars and brown dwarfs are usually single, and that is the reason this discovery is unique. Usually these brown dwarfs are single, and low mass brown dwarfs having a companion is less than 5%. So 2 brown dwarfs, okay, and they are orbiting 2 red dwarf stars. This is a unique discovery. And why do scientists study these brown dwarfs? To basically understand the conditions which are necessary for formation of stars and planets, because these brown dwarfs share similarities similar with stars and planet. And determining their abundance and distribution would help us to understand that how the mass has been distributed when it comes to the entire universe. That is the reason the scientists want to study this brown dwarf. That's all that we have to discuss in today's Analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next, so don't forget to practice quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day, all of you.